Welcome to the newest edition of the Giants Huddle podcast. It is our NFC East Roundtable. You'll recognize a couple of faces. We have a new member this year as well. So let's introduce the people here. We got Fran Duffy, host of the Journey to the Draft podcast from the Eagles official website. We have Dave Helman from DallasCowboys.com, one of the hosts of the Draft Show. Make sure you go check that out. And Bram Weinstein, play-by-play voice of, I'm going to get it right, the Washington Commanders. Gentlemen, welcome. It's good to see you. We are about 2 weeks away. The excitement is building. How are you guys? Everybody jump in. It's fine. We can all talk about each other.
John has been great. It's excited for the draft to be here in a couple weeks.
Absolutely. It should be good, guys. So let's get into it. Just a reminder, folks, you find the Giants Huddle podcast on your favorite podcast platforms. All right, here we go. Guys, it's an interesting draft. Let's start here, I guess, with me because we're the team picking first, sadly, and twice. But the good news is here, guys, in the first 24 picks of the draft, this group on this screen right now is 25% of those selections. 2 picks for the Eagles, 2 for the Giants, 1 for Washington, 1 for Dallas. I'm not sure that's exactly where we want to be, but that's where we are. So the Giants are at 5 and 7. The Eagles are at 15 and 18. The Eagles have 10 picks in this draft. The Giants have 9. Washington selects 11. They have 6 total picks in the draft. And the Dallas Cowboys have 9 picks in this draft as well. They select at 24. So that's where we are. The Giants are at 5 and 7, and I'll start here. And I think the Giants are pretty lucky that this draft kind of lines up with some of their needs. Offensive tackle, pass rusher, cornerback. Those are going to be their 3 needs. And I think at the top of this draft, you're going to have players at those positions. So I guess this is a good place to start, especially for Washington and Philly, who are kind of sitting there praying for some guy to drop out of the top 10 to get to them. What do you guys see? And we'll start with you, Bram, as the strength of this class, and who are some of the guys you're keeping an eye on that you hope could get out of that top 10 and fall to you in that kind of middle meat of this draft class? Bram?
So there's a lot of needs here. And this draft specifically falls into a category of, I think they're going to be happy with whoever is there at 11. There's a number of different directions they could possibly go. If for some reason Kyle Hamilton is out of the top 10, they did not re-sign Landon Collins. They don't have what they call their Buffalo nickel. He would fit that perfectly. Most of us don't believe he'll get that far to them, and we don't think that Washington is apt to trade up for anybody. If that doesn't happen, it's probably one of 2 positions for them. Cornerback, if for some reason Sauce Gardner falls out of the top 10, or more likely Derek Stingley does, that would be a distinct possibility for them. And wide receiver, Ron Rivera's made almost no secret that he likes Chris Olave from Ohio State. And obviously, there are a lot of really, really good choices. This is a very deep draft, especially on the high end at receiver. So they are looking for someone to be opposite of Terry McLaurin. And then I'd say there's an outside chance that if the right tackle is there, that they would do that. That is not a specific need. It is not certainly as much of a need as the other 3 positions that I've said. But I do think it is possible that if that's the way the draft falls out, that the right tackle is there, they would select that and figure out their offensive line.
All right, Fran, let's go to you. You guys are at 15 and 18 with the Eagles. You had another pick. You traded. You picked up an extra one next year. You can touch on that trade, too, if you like. But then just kind of what kind of positions and what players you guys trying to keep an eye on that you hope dropped you in the middle of the draft?
Yeah, sure. I think, first of all, with the trade, I mean, it was another deal that we saw the Eagles make a year ago where they acquired that first-round pick from the Miami Dolphins for this draft. Just all that does just give you added flexibility moving forward. You know, anytime you're making 3 first-round picks, especially clumped together, 3 and 4 picks, that's tough to get from a draft value standpoint, certainly from a salary cap standpoint down the road. And now the Eagles have that flexibility, spread those assets over a couple of years, and just give you that ability to be able to move around moving forward. Now, as far as how this draft pans out, guys, I'm just excited to see how this top 10 goes because it's been as unpredictable as any draft in recent memory when you look at the top 10 and trying to figure out how the cards are going to fall. How many quarterbacks go in the top 10? How is that going to spell things for the rest of the top 15, the top 20 in this draft? You talk about some of these guys, and Bram hit on some of those names, the Derek Stingleys and the Kyle Hamiltons of the world, the Kayvon Thibodeaux. I think you start talking about some of these other blue chip players at some of those positions that we would have said, 3 months ago, oh, that guy's Kayvon Thibodeaux, he's a lock for the top 3. Kyle Hamilton's a lock for the top 5. Well, now we're not seeing that necessarily, right? And so we'll see how many of those guys fall. But I would imagine that a number of them would please Eagles fans in a big way.
No, and then we go to our division winner, the Dallas Cowboys, sitting there fancy with his franchise quarterback on a long-term contract. Doesn't have any worries there. Sitting pretty at 24. Mr. Helman, what are the Dallas Cowboys thinking about? Though you've had a rough offseason, you've lost some really good players.
I'm glad you said it. Look, like nobody wants to hear it, especially not from the Cowboys. I get it, but the goal is to win games and win the division and make the playoffs, which the Cowboys did last year, but they fell way short of what the expectations became over the course of a really nice season. And most Cowboy fans would agree, this team has gotten worse, at least on paper, this offseason. I mean, you don't get better losing Amari Cooper and Randy Gregory and bargain hunting in free agency. And yes, it sucks getting top 10 picks, but it makes draft season kind of boring because the Cowboys are sitting back here at 24 with a bunch of needs and knowing that you're just going to kind of have to wait and see what happens. Maybe something crazy happens. It's happened to the Cowboys the last couple of years. Nobody predicted CD Lamb falling to them at 17 a couple of years ago, but you don't think any of the great pass rushers are going to last all the way to 24. You know, Derek Stingley probably took himself out of the conversation with the pro day that he had the other day. So then you look at it and you say, the Cowboys have done very little to address their offensive line, and their receiver core is probably not up to snuff right now either. So, and that seems to be the blueprint that they're following. We've heard a lot of talk about Zion Johnson, Tyler Linderbaum, and Kenyon Green. And then you throw the receivers in there as well. They've done a lot of work on the Ohio State guys, as well as Treylon Burks out of Arkansas. It's impossible to say, but I think they're just going to hang out at 24 and see who falls to them when all the smoke clears.
Can I say something about what's going on there? Like,
Sure,
real quick?
of course.
Okay.
Of course.
So, like what the Eagles have done here is completely logical, at least, you know, from the outside point of view of like what they're doing and the trade that they made. It makes a lot of sense, especially with no clear, like obvious quarterback to chase down. They kick the can down the road. So if that's the direction they want to go, it makes sense. The Giants made a lot of changes. I think we all know, you haven't said anything, John, yet about what they're going to do, but I think we all know they're going to take an offensive lineman, and then that other pick will be something, right? Something, but it's going to fit a need for them. And logically, it's all making sense what they're thinking about doing. And, you know, we could parse out whether you think Carson Wentz is the right person for Washington, but clearly it's an upgrade, and you can see where they're trying to go, what they're trying to build. I don't understand what Dallas is doing. Like, I frankly, like, it felt screamed out, run it back, even load up even more, that this was just a missed opportunity. They clearly have what looked to be the best roster. And I'm totally confused. Like they do, not only do they look on paper not as good as what they were, but they look weaker significantly. And I'm just confused by what the plan has been this offseason with Dallas.
Dave, Bram sounds like a member of your fan base.
Seriously, I mean, that's what we've been talking about since it kind of became clear that Amari Cooper wasn't in their plans. I think I've figured it out. And if you're willing to look beyond 2022, I'll admit it makes some sense. But the problem is the Cowboys haven't been where they're supposed to be in the eyes of the team or the fan base since 1995 season, 1996. And so it's a tough sell to say to a fan base that's been waiting for a championship for almost 30 years, like, maybe not this year. But I think that's what's happening. Maybe the Cowboys won't say that out loud, but you look at it, I think the Cowboys looked at their situation and said, we got a lot of contracts that we don't feel great about, some of which we've already gotten rid of, like Jalen Smith. Dak Prescott's about to start hitting our cap for $35, $40 million. And we just need to clear up some space. We're going to have Trayvon Diggs asking for a contract before we know it. Micah Parsons, shockingly, even though he's only played one season, is probably somebody you need to consider in that conversation as well. And I think they said, we're going to look at some situations where we can save money. Amari Cooper, $20 million? No, thank you. Randy Gregory? Yeah, they tried to do that deal, but I don't think they're spending a lot of time crying about not getting it done. They bring Michael Gallup back on a much smaller deal. I think they're going to look to this draft for Dalton Schultz's replacement at tight end and another receiver that can step in and complement CeeDee Lamb and Gallup. And I think very quietly, they're not going to say this out loud, I think the Cowboys think that they can win the East with what they have right now and take a step forward in 2023 and 2024. And they're like, if we're worse this year, that's okay, because we'll be in better financial shape in the next few years. I think that's the thinking. I don't think they're going to say that out loud to a fan base that's been waiting 30 years for a championship, but I think that's their strategy.
Well, David, frankly, I think that's the Giants' strategy too. Now, obviously, the two franchises are in a different position, but the Giants are not, going for it this year, right? This is new regime, Joe Shane, Brian Dable, reset, figure it out. Clean up some of the salary cap mess. They'll have more cleaning up to do next year. I mean, the Giants, I think, had at some point before they restructured the contract, they had the least amount of cap space in the league coming off a 4-win year. That's not where you want to be. That's the worst place you can be. So I think the Giants, Bram, you pointed it out, offensive tackle, Neal, Aquanu, Cross. I don't know which one they like the best. I think you can make an argument for any of the three, and then pick the best defensive player, whether that's a cornerback or an edge rusher. Who drops? Is it Sauce Gardner? Great. Is Kayvon Thibodeau? Great. Just pick the best guy that's there. And I think edge rusher, corner, offensive tackle, 3 premium positions. I think the pick will present itself based on who's picked before. But this brings up the potential of trading down, because I do think the Giants, with Daniel Jones going into the last year of his deal, assuming they do not pick up his 5th-year option, they haven't made that decision yet. We'll see. They're trying to keep that franchise quarterback thing in mind moving forward, Fran. I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's what the Eagles are doing too, right? Trying to pick up extra ones to figure out what's going to happen when Jalen Hurts. That's what the Giants are. Carson Wentz is the answer right now. How do you guys feel about your team continuing to try to trade down? I think the Giants will be in the market. I don't know if a team's going to want to go up. Does the team want to get in front of the Panthers to pick a quarterback ahead of them at 6? Does the team want to maybe trade up for an offensive tackle at 7, a team like the Saints or the Chargers? I don't know the answer to that, but I think the Giants would entertain trying to trade down. Fran, let's go to you. The Eagles have already made one move. Could you see Howie Roseman making another move to acquire additional picks? You think they're sticking at this point?
I mean, they did it last year where they traded back with Miami in that deal. That was the Trey Lance trade up with San Francisco, right? And then they traded up to take Devontae Smith, John, if you may remember. So I would say that the big
I do a little bit.
with Howie Roseman and with the Eagles, they're always looking, and it's not necessarily always moving back. It's, hey, that gives us the flexibility to be able to move up as well. And the Eagles have always done a good job of trying to acquire draft capital whenever possible. So they give you that flexibility. And that's always been the big buzzword. And I think that that's something that is always in the back of their mind, is having that ability to move up or down whenever the circumstance fits.
Bram, would you guys look to move down here as well?
Yeah.
Or do you think they're going to stick and pick?
I mean, I think they're in an interesting situation because there are going to be a handful of names they're going to be very interested in. I mean, if Chris Olave isn't there, but he should be, maybe Drake London is, maybe Garrett Wilson is, they might want a receiver. If they don't, they could get the best linebacker on the board. They need a middle linebacker very badly. If for some reason Kyle Hamilton is there, I think he's an easy pick for them. So, one of those 2 corners that were named, Gardner's unlikely, but who knows? Stingley's probably, I think there's a lot of options for them, and they're going to be choosing between a wish list. So that's a good spot for them to be in. That said, I think we all know that somebody is going to move up to take one of these quarterbacks. It's not going to be our teams. It's somebody is going to want to do it. And if any of them, if Malik Willis falls out of the top 10, does someone get itchy and actually want to move up? And I think Washington is a prime candidate to discuss moving down because they feel like they could get any number of those players I just named at 18, 19, 20, or somewhere along that line. So, and they'd like to recoup some of the assets that they gave away to get Carson Wentz. So I do believe that everything is open for them, but I think they're going to be very pleased and most likely going to be selecting someone at 11, unless a scenario by which one of those quarterbacks is there and someone decides they need to jump everybody and take them.
Now, Dave, the Cowboys they're kind of in a win now mode. I imagine trading down for you guys would probably be the least likely scenario, right?
I think I agree. I just like to play the law of averages. I mean, they traded back last year, shockingly did a deal with Philadelphia, which I don't think anybody saw coming. So the odds that I think they do it 2 years in a row, not likely. What's interesting to me is, like, if you look at some of the names they've been heavily tied to, there are quite a few players that don't make sense for Dallas's range that they've been talking to. Charles Cross is one of them. Jordan Davis as well. Chris Olave even. You kind of look at it and you're like, what do y'all know that we don't know that you're talking to these guys? Like, are you considering a trade up? Or are you just hoping that it gets really wacky on Thursday night and some of these guys slide down the board? So I said it at the top. You just look at it, like, the thumbnail on this draft class tends to be that, like, it's lacking in super sexy top 5 star power, but it starts to be a lot of quality once you're talking about the first 15, first 25 picks. I just like the odds that at least one of the guys they really like will be there. Maybe they have the receivers they like snatched away from them. Maybe Zion Johnson goes off the board. But one of the 5 or 6 guys that they really seem to be keyed in on should be there, I would guess. And that's why I think more likely than not, I think they'll just hang in there and make the pick. Trades in back-to-back years would surprise me for sure.
You know, Bram, I want to follow up with you. You mentioned linebacker. You guys did draft Jamin Davis last year. I know he didn't, get on the field a ton. How do you think he matches then? Is he a guy that you're going to play at the will? Sam, how is he going to match if you guys do add that true Mike in the draft this year?
So they drafted him with the intention of trying to turn him into a middle linebacker. And that did not play out particularly well for them. And they've conceded that he's going to have to play an outside linebacker position. At the same time, their defense kind of morphed as the season progressed. Initially, Landon Collins was playing a traditional safety position. They had been trying to get him to play this Buffalo nickel position, which might as well be a linebacker / safety hybrid. As you guys know up there, he's best in the box and around the ball.
Absolutely.
And so they ended up playing a lot of 2 linebacker sets, which a lot of the teams around the league are doing. And I think they're kind of in this middle ground of trying to figure out exactly what they're going to be on the back end. Collins didn't re-sign, which leads me to believe that if somehow Hamilton is there at 11, that's an easy choice for them. He's going to be a selection for them to play that kind of hybrid safety linebacker role. They're talking to Cole Holcomb about potentially being the starting middle linebacker, but they've made the decision that Davis is not going to be that, and he's going to be best served as probably a weak side linebacker. So that's where they're kind of looking. And there's a lot of moving parts here. So if they don't land someone like Hamilton, they may go back to Landon Collins and see if they can get him to change his mind and come back and re-sign here. Otherwise, they're going to be looking for someone on the open market that kind of fills this role. Their defense changed a lot really throughout the course of the year. And I'll be interested to see, based on personnel, how much more it changes again this year. And I think it's going to be partially based on who they have. And that's how I think they're going to play it. But Davis, I think he's going to see a lot more time on the field this year. It's just not going to be the position that was initially intended when they drafted him last year.
It's funny. I think all of us here have mentioned linebacker in one way, shape, or form. I know Eagles fans, Fran, have been begging for you're laughing, a linebacker in the middle of that defense to kind of be a lead. Dave, you guys drafted Micah Parsons, but you almost want another linebacker so you could reduce him to a pass rusher, right? So, Fran, let's go to you first. How do you view, not even this just class of linebacker, but overall, how that position is transforming? I think it's a very difficult position to scout now based on roles in college and the NFL, and just kind of how you view that position, how your team is going to try and fill it, and what type of player they're looking for in that role.
Yeah, I think when you look at the position overall, it's just like, it's very similar to safety. And Bram hit on, the way that Landon Collins was used, the way that the linebackers and safeties are deployed now. It is a team by team kind of situation where every scheme is going to try and see these players differently. They're going to deploy these players differently. Are you going to play, what variety of sub packages are going to use? And then the flexibility with all these players. I mean, Micah Parsons, with the value that he was able to bring on third down as a defensive end, I mean, that was invaluable to that defense. And it was a force multiplier for everybody else across the board and really rose the level of that entire unit. So I think when you look at the way that these guys have the ability to impact the game, now, Micah Parsons, that's a tough player to replicate. I think when you look at Devin Lloyd, a lot of people have looked at him in this class and said, maybe he's that kind of guy. When you see the pass rush production he has had off the edge for the Utah Utes, especially over the last 2 years as like the guy, that 2-time captain out there out west. He's the guy that a lot of people point to, but you look at this entire group and it's a really fun group of linebackers, day one, day two in this draft. Obviously, you've got the 3 Georgia kids and Nakobe Dean, Quay Walker, Channing Tindall, all 3 of which kind of bring skill sets that could be really, really intriguing. Height, weight, speed for Quay Walker, Nakobe Dean with all the intangibles, pure raw range for Channing Tindall. But then you get into the Chad Mumas and the Christian Harrises of the world. The Damone Clark from LSU would have been in that discussion if not for the injury. He had spinal fusion surgery just a couple of weeks ago. So I think when you look at this linebacker group on the whole, it's a really fun, intriguing class. Now it's just a matter of how teams value those players and compare them to others. I know, John, there's been a lot of talk with Joe Shane with the priority being placed on those key positions, the high value positions of quarterback, tackle, pass rusher, corner. You can throw receiver in there as well. linebacker, obviously not high up on that list for a lot of teams. And so that's really what's going to affect the value for some of them. But ultimately, for those linebackers, if you're going to really hit that value to be a first-round pick, I think you've got to be what Parsons was to a certain extent in terms of being able to get after the quarterback. And that sack production is really what helps you kind of reach that ceiling from a value standpoint.
Well, I think Dave brought this up too. I mean, you guys have Jaron Kearse, right? He's a safety, but he's basically your dime nickel linebacker. So a lot of time, one true linebacker is on the field in passing situations now when games are won or lost. So what type of player even do you want in that role now? It's tough.
Yeah, I mean, I use the analogy all the time. Like defense in the NFL is starting to remind me a little bit of basketball. Like basketball has become this positionless sport where you've got, 6'8", 6'9" players playing point, then moving to the paint, shooting. And that's what this looks like, in my opinion. I mean, Stephen Jones kind of did the work for us when he was like, maybe linebacker's not a huge need for us because that's basically what Kearse is, which is totally true. Like he lived in the box last year. He came down and dealt with tight ends. He was a dime linebacker, nickel as well. Like basically anytime they were in a passing situation, he was down in the box and let the free safety handle the coverage duties. And so I think that applies to a lot of stuff. Honestly, it's interesting to think of Kyle Hamilton in that way. I have no idea how far he falls. But people freak out about his 40 time. And I do think that he can play deep safety if that's what somebody wants him to do, but you can also use him 19 other ways that make him valuable. He can be in the box. He can be in the slot. He's basically one of these Swiss Army knife types of players. And I mean, Fran, you're totally right. I think you get yourself in trouble looking for a guy like Micah Parsons. I mean, he was just made in a lab.
Yep.
But I do think that ability to wear about 6 different hats is what's going to make guys valuable in the draft process these next few years.
And by the way, I do think, you talk about positions of value, right? I do think having someone that can be that tight end eliminator and zone guy in the middle of the field now is really valuable. I think it's hard to find, but if you can find that guy that can, run support when you need to, can cover the tight end, can cover in the slot, can play that middle zone, like that is a premium spot, even if it's not, I think, a traditional premium position, because frankly, those guys with that multiple skill set are just really hard to find now, right? I mean, I think Hamilton's one of those guys, there just aren't many of them. Like, not many 235-pound guys that can, run a 4.5 exist on this planet these days. It's just a really hard spot to find, I think. All right, let's go to wide receiver. We've all mentioned it in some way, shape, or form here that it's a need. But I think the question I'm wrestling with now is you see these number one wide receivers get traded because teams can't afford them. Other teams pay them. You have 8 or 9 really good wide receivers coming out in the draft each year. So, and I guess, Bram, we'll start with you. When you calculate when you attack the wide receiver positions, is it worth taking a wide receiver in the first round when you can get a good guy in the second round? When do you pay one? How do you view, and you guys are a great example. You found Terry McLaurin on day 2. He's a, top 10 wide receiver in the league, right? So how are you guys weighing wide receiver value when you attack them based on how deep that class is every year now in the draft? Bram, let's start with you.
I mean, I think like one of the most interesting storylines of this complete offseason is what you just mentioned, that people are paying, potentially overpaying, rechanging, resetting the market, giving up massive amount of picks, especially in the case of the Dolphins to Kansas City, in a draft where everybody universally believes this is one of the deepest high-end receiver drafts. So a lot of these teams could have addressed this need and maybe not gotten Tyreek Hill or Devontae Adams, but could have gotten what looks to be a very, very good high-end receiver at a rookie price without giving up the assets to do it. So something's off with that market. It doesn't really make a tremendous amount of sense to me. For Washington, they're in a really interesting scenario, for them specifically. They've got to pay Terry McLaurin now. He's heading into the last year of his deal. When you hit on a mid-round pick, it's awesome. The tough part is he's making nothing against their cap, and that's about to change this summer. So they're not going to move him. They love him. He's a core guy. They're going to give him probably something commensurate to $20+ million a year, starting this summer. That said, they don't feel like their receiving core is dynamic enough. The hope is Curtis Samuel will be back and he'll be utilized in almost this position flex type running back, receiver, slot, that whole thing. That was the plan with him. We'll see now if he can get healthy and come back. And then they had drafted De'Ami Brown last year in the 3rd round, and he was supposed to be their classic deep threat. That also did not play out. So to your point of they hit on a guy like McLaurin and there's a lot of good receivers, they were saying the same things about Brown, but he didn't end up filling that role, at least not as a rookie, right? They're not giving up on him. It's just that they recognize they need more weapons out there and more explosiveness. And that's why wide receiver is a prime target for them, especially at 11. And if not there, then likely in the 2nd round, because there will be good options. But, as you know, every team likes their guy. And it appears that Chris Olave has caught the attention of this staff. And so I think he's going to be an interesting one for them to pass up. And I think they're only going to pass him up if there's a specific name or two that are still on the board.
Dave, I think you guys are in an interesting position with wide receiver, right? How much different do you think the receiver is going to be that you can get at 24 versus where you can get with your 2nd round pick at 56?
That's the thing that I keep wrestling with, to be honest with you, because honestly, the Cowboys are a fascinating case study with this. And I mean, we can get into Amari if y'all want to. I struggle with that because we had Will McClay on our podcast at the Combine in Indianapolis, the Cowboys executive vice president of player personnel, the guy that puts their draft board together. And he basically said, he was like 5 or 6 freaks come out every year and you can kind of set your watch to it. And so if NFL decision makers feel that way, I think that gives you some great insight into why you see them moving on from some of these players. Having said that, do I think a guy they're going to find in the draft is better than Amari Cooper right away? Not really. And you can kind of see it play out. Michael Gallup is a fantastic example. Cowboys drafted him 81st overall. He's been an unquestioned success. They gave him a $70 million contract. He still only caught 33 passes as a rookie. I mean, if you're not that CeeDee Lamb caliber of guy, the guy that, the 1st round pick that can step in and start right away, you're asking a lot of a rookie to contribute that much right away. Again, Michael Gallup, he had a productive rookie season, not the type of rookie season that's going to carry an offense or even be a big part of it. So that makes me wonder. Obviously, they do have Lamb, who they expect to step into that number 1 role, and Gallup will eventually be recovered from his ACL surgery. But it's hard for me to imagine that a guy they draft outside the 1st round is going to be ready to be a stud right away. I just think that's a high expectation to put on anybody.
What type of receiver, Dave, would the Cowboys look to target? Are they looking for a slot guy, an X? Because, these guys come in all shapes and sizes.
I don't really think it matters, at least not that much. Michael Gallup is a pretty prototypical X receiver. He's a great contested ball catcher. CD can do a little bit of both. He's fantastic in the slot, but he can play outside. So I think that gives them the flexibility to draft whoever they like the most. My personal opinion is Dak Prescott, he likes guys that get open. And I mean, obviously, like that sounds elementary, but Dak Prescott, he is, and I don't mean this as an insult, but I think he's a cautious quarterback in the sense that he doesn't want to just let her rip. Like he wants a guy that is obviously open, that can beat his man. Dak Prescott doesn't want to put the ball in harm's way. That's how he's managed to keep his interception total so low all these years. And so me personally, I'm looking for route runners. Bram, it pains me to hear how much Washington loves Chris Olave, because I think he would do wonders in this offense, just with his route running ability, the way that he can create separation. That's a guy that I think would fit really well in this offense. But don't get me wrong. I mean, with CeeDee Lamb, Dalton Schultz, and Michael Gallup on the field, I think just about anybody could have success here. Traylon Burks would be a heck of a lot of fun to watch as well. So like I said, I don't think it really matters. Just get somebody with some talent.
Fran, similar question for you. You guys have Devontae Smith, who can play inside, play outside. You have a pick at 51. You pick at 15 and 18. Do you wait? Do you just get one of the top guys that, maybe your favorite? Guys might get the 2nd or 3rd wide receiver off the board at 15. How do you think the Eagles are viewing this wide receiver board, given what you guys have on your roster?
Yeah, I think that, it's similar to what Dave said. When you listen to Nick Sirianni talk about the wide receiver position, and he was a former wide receiver in college and a former wide receiver coach in the NFL. And so he's very invested in that position. He's not a big believer in like putting the labels on guys. Oh, this guy's an X, this guy's a Z, this guy's a slot. I think it's very similar to the discussion we were having earlier about defense with linebackers and safeties. They look at their receivers as all movable pieces. And so I don't know that they're going to look at it and say, all right, we need a pure X to put opposite opposite Devontae Smith. I think they lined up Devontae Smith as an X receiver last year, and he showed the ability to win. They moved him into the slot. They had him on the move as a Z. So I don't think that they look at it and say, okay, we need a big body opposite Devontae. By the way, they also have Dallas Goedert, who also is very capable of lining up as an X receiver and winning. And so I don't know that they necessarily look at it that way. To me, when I look at just the wide receiver market in general, big picture, it goes back to, John, one of the first things you said in this part of the discussion. There's kind of like two forces at play here, right? You've got number one, the idea of, hey, look, we love the idea of getting a blue chip wide receiver talent and getting him for 5 years, getting that extra year of flexibility with that option, with that 5th year option, and say, okay, we can lock this guy down before we have to pay him, and hopefully not, but eventually potentially deal him out. What we've seen here this offseason with Devontae Adams, with Tyreek Hill, what we've seen in the past with Stephon Diggs. But then there's the other side of it where you look and you stop me when you hear a first round pick, guys. But I'm just like looking at a list here and it's like Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, DK Metcalf, Adam Thielen, Allen Robinson, Michael Thomas, Cortland Sutton, Kenny Galladay, Terry McLaurin, Tyler Lockett, Deebo Samuel, AJ Brown. You go down the list. All these guys were not first round picks. And so I think there's both ends of that argument where you say, all right, well, where do teams want to go at wide receiver? You can make the argument either way.
All right, let's have some fun here, guys. How do you think the top 4 picks in this draft are going to go? I forget, one of you guys mentioned I think, Fran, it was you, how unpredictable this draft is going to look like in the top 10. So let's start with you, Fran. How do you think the first 4 picks in this draft are going to go?
I'm starting to buy into the smoke about Trayvon Walker going number 1. I think because we'll go. Let's go Walker 1 to Jacksonville. I think Aiden Hutchinson slam dunk to being a hometown kid with Detroit at number 2. Houston, I would say offensive tackle, and so we'll plug in an offensive tackle there. We'll say that they decide to go Evan Neal. Let's go Ike Ekwonu for the Giants at 4.
Oh no, Jets at 4.
Or the Jets at 4. That's right. Let's go. Let's go Kayvon Thibodeau for the Giants, or for the Jets at 4.
Okay, so Bram, you think heavy defense early as well?
Yeah, I do. I think heavy defense first 2 picks. Probably those 2 that he named. I would assume maybe the NC State tackle at 3, and then 4 Jets. That could be a surprise. That could be Sauce Gardner. That could be Kyle Hamilton. I think it's a defensive player for Robert Saleh. That's what I think.
Yeah, I'm with you. Dave, you can either go top 4, or just give me what you think a big surprise might be in this draft that you can't have on your mind.
Well, it's not so much a surprise, and I don't think either one of y'all are wrong. But don't get me wrong at all. I wonder if Jacksonville's overthinking this a little bit. Like it's been all edge rusher this entire time, and I get it. But with respect to those guys, like I don't think Hutchinson, Walker, or even Thibodeau are like a Myles Garrett sort of slam dunk. Like this guy's definitely going to get 15 sacks a year.
I agree.
And you just drafted Trevor Lawrence. I would feel better. I feel safer taking one of these tackles at number 1 overall and knowing that he can protect Trevor Lawrence. I know they spent money on it in free agency. I've seen what an amazing offensive line can do for a young quarterback. I mean, that's how Dak Prescott got his feet wet in the first place, was not having to worry about getting sacked for the first 2 years of his career. So like I said, I don't think y'all are wrong. If I had to guess, I bet the Jags do go defense, but I think that might be a mistake. I guess that's my opinion.
No, look, I'm with you. And I think, look, Cam Robinson's a solid player, but if he's the reason you're not picking a great offensive tackle, I'm not sure if you're necessarily making the right Dave, I'm with you. I think, you drafted Trevor Lawrence number 1. He's literally the most important person in your building. You should do everything you can to try to help that guy succeed. I happen to agree with you. Now, the Giants are hoping they go defensive end because they want one of those offensive tackles to drop to him. But I totally get where you're coming from. Bram, you mentioned this earlier with the quarterbacks. Let's have fun with this. How many quarterbacks in the first round of the draft, and who picks them? Bram, why don't we start with you?
Oh man. Okay. I know this is an unpopular pick, but I do believe that Malik Willis will go in the top 10. I just don't know to who. And I don't know whether it's Carolina, Atlanta, someone trading up to get him. I feel like that is happening. And then I believe Kenny Pickett will be selected in the bottom half of the round somewhere by somebody, maybe the Steelers, something like that. New Orleans is an interesting one to watch with a couple of picks there now to take a quarterback potentially. And I'll go with there will be a third, and I don't know if it's Matt Corral or Desmond Ridder, but one of them goes late in the first round.
Fran, what do you think?
I like Pickett to the Panthers. They've got one pick in the top 100, and so obviously the desperation will kind of breed that pick. But I think when you look at Pickett to the Panthers, Malik Willis, I like to Detroit. I don't know if it's a trade back up from because they've got 2 picks right in the 30 range there, or if he ends up in Pittsburgh. That'd be it for me. I don't know. I guess Ritter would be the next guy in there, and I don't know if he ends up in Pittsburgh if Willis ends up elsewhere. But those would be the 3 guys I would look at.
For some reason, for me, I feel like Malik Willis to the Steelers would be good for them and good for him. He is this. It's organizational, consistency. They have Trubisky there. They can be patient with him. And I feel like that's a spot where he's not going to be put out there too soon. So I don't know how that's going to happen. I think the Steelers would probably have to move up to make that happen. Because as Bram mentioned, I think he is the highest upside of all the quarterbacks, but a lot of work to do. For me, that just kind of makes sense for me. I think there will be 2. I think you could get a trade up late to get one of these guys in a 5-year, a 5th-year option. But I'm going to say 2 with Malik Willis to the Steelers being the one that I think makes the most sense. How about you, Dave?
I mean, when you talk about this for enough months, there are landing spots for prospects that you kind of fall in love with. And I'm with you. Like, if I could wave a magic wand and put Malik Willis in Pittsburgh, I would do it because I just think that would be fun all around. I tend to agree. He's going in the top 12. Like, the talent is too enticing. He seems like such a high character guy, the guy that you would want to be the face of your franchise. So when you combine those 2 things, the natural talent with that charisma, yeah, somebody's going to fall in love with him and make him a top 15 pick. I think the Panthers just seem so desperate for a quarterback that they're just going to do whatever they have to get the guy they like. So if it's Pickett, sure. If maybe it's Willis, I don't know, but a quarterback. And then I think Corral is probably just too enticingly talented to slip out of the first round. So I would say those 3 guys for me would be the ones that I would expect to hear about.
I thought was really interesting from Carolina. If you listen to their GM, Scott Fitterer, he was basically priming the fan base for, we're going to pick a quarterback. We know it's a reach. And we know that Mel and Todd and everybody are going to criticize us. So just be prepared for it because we feel like we need to do it. If you just listen to him, you could hear him say it. Like, we're going to do this, even though we know everybody is going to come down on us for overdrafting somebody.
Exactly.
That sounds like a great organizational philosophy. I don't know. All right, 2 more quickies before we say goodbye. Best chance of a trade in the top 10. Either who's going to trade down or who you think might trade up. You can go either direction. Your pick. Helman, why don't we start with you?
I mean, it's just easy to look at what the Saints did with Philly. I mean, that would be it reminds me of what Philly did to get Carson Wentz, honestly. Is like you move before the draft so that you can get closer into that top 5, whatever picks to get the quarterback that you really like. Or maybe it's another guy. I don't know. I saw their GM was trying to play it off like, oh, maybe we'll just take 3 players we love. And I was like, I don't know, man. That feels like a lot to give up for somebody that's not a QB. I don't believe you. And then I don't know. This is a cop out. Sorry, Fran, but like Howie's Howie. Like he loves that stuff too much to not do it. So I mean, would anybody be shocked if the Eagles are part of a draft night trade? I don't think so. That's my final answer.
Grant, what do you think?
For me, I would say the Saints certainly as a team to watch. I think, look, if you look at Carolina, and I do feel like, hey, like it feels like they're going to take a quarterback early, like I mentioned earlier. But look at where Fitterer came from, and look what Fitterer did last year in his first draft as the general manager in Carolina. They traded a ton, and so to me, like that might be a prime spot. Now it's just a matter of who you're going to get to move up to number 6.
It's funny. I think the Giants actually going to try to trade down. It's funny, Dave, you said how the Saints rather kind of did what the Eagles did last year. I think the Giants would have preferred the package the Saints sent to Philly for the second one this year than the actual one that they got. So I thought that was a possibility before that trade. Now, I don't know, baby. I think that, and this is where I'll go. I think the Chargers are going to move up. The AFC West has been such an arms race this year. It's by far the best division in football. It's a nightmare to play in. We all watched the Chargers and the Storm Norton experience last year at right tackle. I mean, if they had a better right tackle, I think they're in the playoffs. I think they're going to do everything they can to move up, to try to get one of those top 3 tackles if they can. Maybe even move up a few spots just to get Trevor Penning, who I think will be off the board when they pick at 17. So I think the Chargers are a team that could move up. Bran, how about you?
I mean, obviously the top two teams would trade down if they could, but I think
Yeah.
there's nobody there that I think would be enticing enough to get somebody to actually do that. The two teams I would watch, I think pretty closely. I agree about Carolina, but I think it's going to have to be strategic because I think they want to do something. I would watch Atlanta and Seattle at the bottom of the top 10. I think they're both probably not unlike the way Washington calculated. They better go get a quarterback on the open market. This is a team that needs a quarter. Both those teams need quarterbacks now all of a sudden. I think they calculated like we either need to get it in free agency or we need to punt down the road because we don't trust that any of these particular rookies are there. And I think that they're going to have the same calculation. So does Atlanta bite and take Malik Willis? Does Seattle bite and take Malik Willis? If they don't, I think they're prime candidates to move down, try to gather more picks, get through this season, and hope that the quarterback class next year looks different. So I would be looking at them as teams that are probably trying to move down, and it might be more enticing for them to do it because those quarterbacks might be on the board, and there will be a name or two of people that are going, I can't believe that person is still there, and I think so they'll have an opportunity to make that case.
All right, finally, we'll do predictions. You can do it either way. Either give me the ideal scenario or give me the scenario you think is going to happen. I'll leave it to each of you to take it any direction you want, but just let us know which you are, in fact, predicting. Dave, let's start with you because you picked last year. The division winner, you get first go.
You're going to start with the guy that has the hardest picture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Come on.
Tell us what's going to happen, Dave. Tell us for all of us.
Predict all first 23 picks. It'll be great.
What's funny is like I mean, obviously they were picking much higher, but they were in a similar situation last year where like all of the breadcrumbs led to cornerback. And that's what was going to happen until Carolina and Denver stole those players out from underneath them. And, nobody's complaining about winding up with Micah Parsons, I'm sure. This year, I think it's offensive line. I think in an ideal scenario, I think Zion Johnson is their pick. It's just a matter of if he slips. And, if he doesn't, honestly, I think the need is big enough that they'll talk themselves into Kenyon Green or maybe Tyler Linderbaum. Either one of those three, with the ideal pick being Zion, I think. And I would imagine one of the three will be there. It would be surprising to see all of them go.
Fran, you got it tough. You have two picks you got to make here.
I think that, look, if you look at, and I'm a big believer when you look at this stuff is like follow the money, right? And so you look at where is money tied up and where is money not going to be tied up soon. And obviously the Eagles have a number of aging defensive linemen and also some defensive linemen that are coming off the books next year. So I think when you look at how this class shakes out, obviously that's the strength of this class is the defensive front. It's just a matter of who goes and who doesn't. Like, is Jermaine Johnson there? Is George Karlaftis there? If either of those guys fall, that's great. If not, like, is Jordan Davis there? Is Devontae Wyatt there? And I think when you start getting into that group, I think that's ultimately where you're kind of looking. And ideally, it's like in that Johnson Karlaftis kind of mold. But that's going to be a difficult thing to be able to see pan out. And that's why the Eagles, you kind of need a couple of those quarterbacks to kind of go high. You need some of those surprises to be able to happen. And so we'll see. But I think that the D-line is definitely the area where the ideal scenario, if you're just looking at it from a number standpoint.
Bram, I think I know where you're going with this, and I think he's a safety from Notre Dame.
If he's there at 11, I think it's going to be too hard to pass up. I mean, it's just an obvious need, and he fits this kind of position flex idea that we've all been talking about that Rivera really loves. And considering Landon Collins, they did not come to terms on a restructured contract. I mean, it's just a gaping hole in the defense. If he is not there, which at least initial projections didn't look like would be the case, I think it would be Derek Stingley Jr. And if he's not there or they go a different direction, it would be Chris Olave as a receiver. But, I think in the end, them trading back, it seems to make a tremendous amount of sense because of all of the different needs that they have and how deep at those positions this draft is.
All right, Giants, I have it easy. I don't have to predict 4 picks. So whichever one of the top 3 tackles are off, I'll go ideal scenario. For me, the order is Neil Ekwonu-Cross. They need a right tackle, not a left tackle. So I think that's the order. And then if Sauce Gardner's there, I think that's a pretty easy pick if he manages to stay. Otherwise, whichever one of the best pass rushers is left, right? Thibodeau, great. Trayvon Walker, I'm not as sold on as everybody else is, but if he's there at 7, I think you pick him. Joe Shane has picked size at defensive line before, so I think that's where you go. Gentlemen, great stuff. Enjoy the next couple of weeks. Thanks so much for being with us.
See you.
That's the Giants Little Podcast. Everybody, thanks for being with us. Again, stay tuned. Giants mobile app, giants.com/podcast, and your favorite podcast platforms. We'll see you next time.